They took everything, my wife, my fortune, my children's love, even my name, and they did it smiling. I was 70 years old the day the judge's gavel came down and erased 40 years of my life in one strike. That sound still wakes me up at night, not because of what I lost, but because of what it awoke inside me. If you're hearing my voice right now, you're not here by accident. This is my story, the story of how a broken old man found a letter buried in dust and turned it into a weapon sharper than revenge. So before we begin, hit that like button, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from, because when this story ends, I want to know if justice sounds the same in your city as it does in mine. My name is Jonathan Mercer, and this is how I took back everything they stole. She smiled when the gavel fell, small, surgical, like a razor slipped under a rib. You lost, Sabrina mouthed without moving her lips, and the whole damn courtroom felt like it tilted a few degrees to the left. The clerk called the next case. The bailiff's knuckles tapped the rail. On paper, I was 68 years old, 11 blood pressure steady, a man who'd spent 30 years building things that stood up to wind and time. In that instant, I was a paper cup buckling in a stranger's hand. Judge Meeks read the orders in a tone you'd use for a traffic ticket. 3 properties awarded to Ms. Cole, the Midtown condominium, the Decatur residence, and the Tybee Island cottage vehicles brokerage accounts, approximately $8.4 million in marital assets. Protective order continued. The court recommends the adult children maintain distance pending therapeutic intervention. There was a smattering of throat clearing, a zipper, a cough. I heard none of it. All I heard was Sabrina's breath, measured and mint cool as she leaned into her lawyer's shoulder. Ethan Vance, blue tie, expensive grin, and whispered something that made him smirk. I caught my reflection in the courtroom's exit glass tie, wrong eyes too bright, and thought, this is the face they picked. The villain that fits. Outside, the Fulton County heat slapped me like I owed it money. Reporters hung back. Divorce isn't sexy unless someone throws a punch, so the only cameras waiting were the ones in other people's hands. That, the man, a voice said. That's him, another answered, and kept walking. A text buzzed from an unknown number. Loved the show. Pay your bill. I deleted it and stared at the granite steps until the building stopped swaying. My phone lit again. Atlanta ledger developer accused of coercive control loses everything. Below a photo the size of my palm, my jaw caught mid-clench. Sabrina's sunglasses catching the sun like a trophy. Ethan held the door for her chivalry dipped in oil. Congratulations, I heard him say. Sabrina looked back over her shoulder like a model at the end of a runway and gave me the same small blade of a smile. I thought of sermons about wolves and clothing and how you never see the teeth until they're already in you. I didn't speak to anyone walking down those steps. I counted them. 26 to the second landing, 39 to the street. I have spent a lifetime trusting numbers when people fail. People like to imagine the ruin happens with thunder sirens, cuffs, spectacle. Sometimes ruin is banal. It is the quiet way a bank app refuses your face. It is a green light that won't change on Cortlandt Street because the city timed it so. It is the way an old friend says, "Brother, I'm praying for you," and won't meet your eye. By dusk, I was back at the weekly rental off Moreland Avenue, the kind of place where the lobby plants are fake and still dusty. The clerk slid me a key without looking up from her show and whispered, "No smoking, no visitors, no noise after 10. I nodded like the rules could save me. Inside the room smelled like somebody's last cigarette and lemon cleanser. I put the cardboard banker's box on the bed, 3 shirts, a framed photo of Naomi in scrubs, Darren holding his first lease, my father's pocket knife, and a stack of legal folders thin enough to feel like a joke. Someone had drawn a heart on the Tyvek envelope that held the final decree. I didn't open it. Ethan had choreographed the loss as if it were a dance, the ex parte protective order that froze my accounts before I heard there was a petition. The psychologist with the clipboard and pre-written sorrow. The neighbors I'd barbecued for swearing they'd heard yelling through walls that aren't shared. Coercive control. Sabrina's pleading said, and the words themselves stuck to me like burrs. Not a bruise, not a broken plate, just the invisible things that are hardest to prove you didn't do. 2 weeks ago, a cop had come to my gate to serve the temporary order. He had young eyes and old shoulders. "Sir, you need to vacate within 24 hours. I nodded and walked him through the house I'd painted with my own hands. He said, "Nice place." I said it was. My kids didn't answer the phone. The last voicemail I left for Naomi was short. "Baby, it's Dad. Call me or don't. But no, I love you." The one to Darren I deleted because it sounded like begging. People say time heals. Time also hardens. In the space where they should have been, there was an ache the size of our living room couch. The motel air conditioner rattled like a jar of bolts. I boiled 2 hot dogs in the coffee maker and laughed because I'd once paid $1,200 for a single bottle of wine. I slept with my back against the door. Habit. You pick up when the world announces it can turn on you, and then proves the point. Morning came like a debt collector. I shaved in a mirror that had seen worse men. The face looking back wasn't broken. It was tired of fighting air. I put on the gray suit the judge had already seen because I had no other suit that fit the new life, and drove to the credit union because the motel rate was due, and for the first time since I was 21 I had to ask a teller for mercy. Atlanta Mutual Credit and Trust sits in a strip with a nail salon and a tax prep office that advertises walk-ins welcome. The glass is polished, the smiles are practiced. I had an old passbook my father gave me with a few dollars in it when I was a young man, back when you believed in what a stamp meant. The account had a name on it I hadn't said out loud in years. Frederick H. Mercer, my grandfather, who wore a Pullman porter cap like a crown and taught me to fold a shirt sharp enough to cut a finger. I stepped into air conditioning so cold it made my eyes water. The teller boy with a kind face and a tie that wasn't his took the passbook, flipped it like a relic he didn't want to smudge, and frowned. Mr. Mercer, this is pretty old. So am I." He smiled because he had to. 1 second. He took it to a glass office where a man with silver hair and the posture of a lifelong choir director sat behind a screen. The man, Hollis Greer, his nameplate said, opened a drawer closed. It tapped his keyboard like he was negotiating with it, then picked up the passbook again as if it might answer. He looked up at me, expression empty, then careful. "Mr. Mercer," he said, like we were in church, "would you mind stepping into my office if you've never been the most dangerous thing in a bank?" The poor man with a history. "Then you don't know the way. Eyes track you, like you might break and take the room with you." I walked past posters promising financial literacy and into a space that smelled faintly of old paper and cedar clean. Hollis closed the door. The click sounded gentler than the judge's gavel had. He gestured to a chair and sat opposite me, hands tented the passbook between us like a childhood photo. "Can I see your ID?" I handed him my license. He studied it longer than he needed to set it beside the passbook and cleared his throat. "This account is unusual," he said, choosing his words like stepping stones across a river. "It was opened under your grandfather's name with survivorship instructions attached to your father and then to you. I'm just trying to close it," I said. "Whatever's in there, if there's $20 left, it'll keep the lights on another night." He didn't smile. He didn't move. He tapped a few more keys. I watched his face go through something like grief, then wonder, then a flat banker's resolve. He turned his monitor slightly. Numbers marched across the screen like little soldiers that didn't know they'd already won the war. "Mr. Mercer," he said softly, and I remembered how my grandfather used to say my name when he wanted me to sit up straight. "This account never went dormant." Meaning, he said, "it's been active, continuously. There were transfers in the 50s from a utility stock trust. We can trace the mergers, dividends, reinvested splits. Your grandfather left very specific instructions, and because the original instruments were written the way they were, it continued to grow." "How much are we talking about?" I asked, expecting him to say a few thousand. A nice surprise. A week of dignity. Hollis didn't answer. He slid the screen the rest of the way. The number sat there simple as daylight, obscene as a billboard. My breath did a small, embarrassing trick. The room took one step back. I pressed my fingers to the table because I don't like to clutch chairs. I thought of my grandfather's hands, the way his nails were always clean, the way he'd told me that a man's real wealth is the room he could enter with his head high. Sir Hollis said, voice steady as a metronome. Before we discuss anything else, I need to confirm your relationship to Frederick, and then we will talk about privacy, because if you leave here and tell anybody before protections are in place, you could put yourself in harm's way. Harm, I said and almost laughed. I just buried my life in a courtroom. He nodded sadly like a man who'd watched a lot of small tragedies and a few big ones. He opened a thin, yellowed folder and removed an envelope sealed in wax, the color of old blood. My name in fountain pen slanted across the front like a hand I wanted to hold, to be opened when the boy needs it most. Your grandfather left this with the original papers, Hollis said. I am obligated to give it to you now. I wanted to tear it open with my teeth, and I wanted to leave it sealed forever. I did neither. I placed it on the table like a relic and looked at the number again because numbers don't flinch. Outside, a lawn crew's mower droned like a distant hive. In the lobby, someone laughed too loudly. In my chest, something steady I thought I'd lost took a breath. Sabrina's smile flashed across my mind, the precision, the certainty. Ethan's smirk, Judge's voice flat as parchment, my children's silence. The ledger of the last year columned itself without my permission. Left side losses, right side losses, bottom line red. And then this absurd, wholly undeserved line item that changed everything and nothing at once. Mr. Mercer, Hollis said, and I realized I'd been staring at the envelope like it could read itself. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I looked up and my voice came out even. I understand enough. He nodded. Then we'll proceed carefully, quietly. I slipped the envelope into my inside jacket pocket where verdicts and death notices live. Hollis printed a list of next steps, lawyer, tax counsel, new accounts under lock and key, and slid it to me with both hands like passing a baby across a pew. On the way out, the teller with the kind tie looked up curious. I smiled at him, small and surgical, and not at all like Sabrina's. Outside, the heat folded over me again, but it didn't feel like a hand around my throat anymore. It felt like the city breathing. The motel would still smell like smoke and lemon. The paper would still shout the lie. My kids would still not answer. But there was a letter against my heart and a number in my head and a sentence Mr. Hollis had not meant as a prophecy echoing in my bones. This account never went dormant. Neither, I thought, did I. I wasn't born rich, but I was born with something rarer. A father who worked until his back screamed, and a grandfather who believed hard work was a kind of prayer. Memphis, 1978. The heat came through the walls like judgment, and I sold burial insurance door to door, wearing a suit 2 sizes too big and shoes that bit my ankles. I'd knock on 100 doors, hear 99 rejections, and keep smiling through the 100th because every no was one step closer to a yes. I didn't have much, but I had rhythm. Persistence becomes its own kind of music. I learned how to talk to people the way a preacher reads a congregation, listening for the small quiver that means they might believe you. I saved every dollar until I could open my own agency, Mercer Risk and Real Estate. The hand-painted sign said, and if you looked close enough, you could see the brush tremble where I wrote my own name. Back then, Atlanta was a promise, not a skyline. I moved there in '96 with one suitcase and a head full of plans. Midtown was still rough around the edges, the Beltline nothing but an old rail line full of kudzu. I bought my first property for $12,000 cash, and a handshake fixed it myself, lived in the attic while I rented the downstairs. By the time the Olympics left town, I was flipping houses faster than the bank could foreclose on them. Every deal felt like a resurrection. I married Sabrina Cole at 36 when the world first started calling me sir in meetings. She was a gospel singer back then, voice like Sunday morning sunlight laugh that filled a room. We met at a Chamber of Commerce banquet. I spilled sweet tea on her dress and tried to apologize with a napkin, but she laughed a sound so open it made people around us turn and smile. Finally, she said, a man not afraid to ruin something perfect. I was gone after that. We built our life brick by brick, promise by promise. 2 children. Naomi with her mother's empathy, and my stubbornness. And Darren, quiet and sharp, always studying how things worked. When I bought our first real house in Decatur, Sabrina stood in the empty kitchen running her fingers over the marble countertop like she was touching the future. We didn't have wealth yet, but we had momentum. We had family dinners, fried chicken Fridays, peach cobbler Sundays, laughter bouncing off the walls. I tell my kids the same thing every night before bed. Money matters, but your name matters more. My father used to say that too, and it stuck to me like gospel. I made sure they saw me work, saw me treat people right. By 45, I'd made my first million, not all at once slow, like Dawn. I wore a watch that cost more than my first car, but I still cut my own grass. I invested in neighborhoods nobody wanted because I remembered what it was like to be unwanted. Southside, Pittsburgh, East Point. I bought blocks where folks saw blight and I saw potential. Sabrina liked the rewards. The dinners at Bones, the new Mercedes, the Ocean View cottage on Tybee Island. I didn't blame her. She'd grown up with little same as me. But somewhere along the way, she began to crave the spotlight more than the security. She joined charity boards, started wearing labels I couldn't pronounce, talked about networking with people who didn't know her maiden name. At first I thought it was pride, that hunger to belong somewhere better. But pride is a sneaky beast. It doesn't shout, it seeps. It started with small things. She came home later from meetings dressed sharper, perfume thicker. The smile changed, it got curated. You're working too hard, she'd say, brushing my cheek like I was one of the kids. I'm just out keeping us visible. Visible became her word. She said it like salvation. When I'd come home from job sites, tired and dusted with drywall, she'd already be dressed for another dinner, something hosted by attorneys or lobbyists or foundation folks. And always there was that name, Ethan Vance. He's the best estate attorney in Atlanta, she said one night, scrolling through her phone. He's helping me sort out Aunt Lydia's inheritance mess. Real professional. I'd met him once briefly at a ribbon cutting. Mid-40s, slick hair handshake too long, smile too white. The kind of man who says your name too many times to sound sincere. I remember thinking he smelled like ambition and expensive deceit. Seems like you two meet a lot, I said, not jealous, just noticing. Sabrina laughed light easy but too practiced. Don't be silly, John. You know me. And I did. Or I thought I did. Our kids were grown by then. Darren had gone to Emory for business. Naomi was already working 12-hour shifts as a nurse at Grady. We'd done our job as parents. We were supposed to start enjoying life, travel slow mornings, a porch swing somewhere with sweet tea and peace. But the peace started thinning. She became restless, distracted. We argued about trivial things, curtains expenses, whether to sell the Decatur house and move closer to town. She started accusing me of being controlling. I brushed it off, thinking it was midlife noise. Every marriage hits turbulence after 30 years. You tell yourself it'll smooth out if you just keep steady. Then came the nights she didn't answer the phone. Battery died, she'd say, tossing her purse down. Or we lost track of time. Little lies that don't break anything alone but wear through trust like termites in a beam. One Sunday after church, I walked into the kitchen to find her humming that old gospel hum I loved while scrolling through messages. When she saw me, the music stopped mid-note. She turned the phone face down. You okay? I asked. She smiled too bright, just tired. I wanted to believe her. After all those years, you learn to confuse denial with loyalty, but loyalty cuts both ways. I started noticing small withdrawals from our joint account, round numbers recurring. $5,000 here, $7,000 there, each labeled consulting. I confronted her once gently. Sabrina, you moving money? Her eyes flickered, then softened. It's for charity, John. I'm helping a shelter Ethan's firm sponsors. I nodded because I wanted to stay married to peace. Weeks later, I found a receipt in the laundry, St. Regis, Atlanta. 2 entrees, 1 bottle of Bordeaux that cost more than my first month's rent back in Memphis. The date was the same night she'd told me she was meeting the church ladies to plan a fundraiser. I didn't say a word. Not that night, not the next. But something in me started watching quiet, patient, like a man waiting for the train that's already late. One evening, she came home glowing. "Ethan says I could volunteer with his firm's outreach program," she said, slipping out of her heels. "It's about helping women trapped in controlling marriages rebuild their lives." I stared at her, heart thudding slow and hard. "You think you are trapped, Sabrina?" She froze for half a second, just long enough to answer without words. Then she smiled the way people do when they've already decided which story they'll tell the world. "Of course not, baby. Why would you say that? Because lies sound different when they come from the person who used to pray for you." A week later, I got home early from a site visit. I'd closed a deal faster than expected, wanted to surprise her with dinner at her favorite restaurant, Blue Ridge Grill. When I walked in, the house was quiet except for her voice from the study. She was laughing softly. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's still busy with his little projects. A silly old man who thinks he can control the world with spreadsheets." Pause. "Yes, Ethan, just a few more months. By then everything will be ours." The air went thin. I stood there frozen, the world narrowing to that voice, the same voice that once whispered prayers into my shoulder, now planning my funeral in legal language. I backed away silent, careful not to let the floor creak. Outside the sun was setting, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know where to go. I drove aimlessly through Atlanta's neon haze until I ended up in front of my first office, Mercer Risk and Real Estate, the sign still faint on the old brick, though the building had turned into a vape shop. 30 years. 30 years of sweat and hope and faith, all of it in a stranger's mouth. That night, I slept in my car. The next morning, I hired a private investigator. Her name was Lydia Tran, and her eyes said she'd seen worse betrayals than mine. "You sure you want the truth?" she asked. "I can't live with anything else," I told her. 3 weeks later, she handed me a manila envelope full of photographs, receipts, call logs, and 1 voicemail recording that ended with Sabrina's voice saying, "Once the judge signs, he'll have nothing left." I thought about my grandfather again. About how he used to say, "Son, every man builds his own gallows if he keeps ignoring the creak of the rope." I'd been ignoring it for years, and now the rope was singing. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't fall on you all at once. It bleeds you slow, drop by drop, until you mistake dying for exhaustion. When Lydia handed me the folder, I sat in my truck outside the diner on Peachtree and stared at it for a full hour. The first photo was of Sabrina and Ethan standing too close in the parking lot of the St. Regis Valet. His hand on the small of her back, her smile tilted the way women smile when they know they're safe in the lie. The next was a hotel receipt from Savannah. 2 nights, same room, same credit card, 2 fake signatures. Then call logs, hundreds of minutes, dozens of texts between midnight and dawn. But what caught my eye wasn't the affair. It was the paperwork attached to the back. Lydia had pulled county filings, strange authorizations, notarized by a court clerk named Marla Keene, who, as it turned out, shared a mailing address with Ethan's law office. Every page smelled of a setup. A week later, I came home to find a sheriff's deputy waiting by the mailbox. He held a manila envelope like it was a dirty secret. "Mr. Mercer," he asked, "you've been served. Inside a petition for divorce and an emergency protective order." The words read like fiction written by a cruel hand. Emotional abuse, financial control, isolation, fear. She'd painted me into the kind of monster women need restraining orders for. That night I called Sabrina. No answer. Then Ethan. He picked up on the second ring voice, smooth as a TV preacher's. "Jonathan," he said, too familiar. "I can't talk about the case. Conflict of interest, you understand, but I hope you'll take this opportunity to find peace." "Peace," I said, my hand tightening around the phone. "You think stealing a man's life is peace, perspective," he corrected. "Some of us just see the world differently." I hung up before the rage made me say something that would end up in court. The next morning I met Caleb Dodge, a silver-haired attorney with more years than teeth who'd handled my business contracts for 2 decades. "John," he said, "I've seen a lot of ugly divorces, but this smells off. Still, don't worry. We'll fight." He filed a response calm and proper. I wanted war. Within days, Sabrina moved out. The neighbors saw her leave with one suitcase and tears streaming down her face. Performance perfect. Local gossip spread faster than mold. She's been suffering for years.
Poor thing, controlling husband. People love a story that makes them feel virtuous for believing it. Then came the financial freeze. Ethan filed an emergency motion claiming I'd hidden assets. My business accounts locked overnight. My Amex declined at a diner where I'd been eating breakfast for 20 years. The waitress looked at me like I'd turned invisible. Caleb cursed under his breath when he read the motion. "This shouldn't happen without discovery," he muttered. But Meeks signed off anyway. Judge Valerie Meeks, early 50s reputation for being tough but fair. I donated to her campaign years ago. Turns out fairness depends on who writes the narrative first. Our first hearing was a disaster. Ethan strutted into court in a 3-piece navy suit, voice honeyed and rehearsed. He painted Sabrina as a saint who'd endured decades of silent manipulation. He said I restricted her spending, mocked her ambitions, and used financial intimidation as control. When it was our turn, Caleb presented vacation photos, tax records showing joint accounts, and letters from our pastor praising our marriage. Ethan smirked through it all, waiting for his cue. Then he produced forensic spreadsheets, hundreds of pages of alleged diverted corporate funds signed by me. I'd never seen them. My lawyer frowned, flipping through. "John, did you sign any of these?" "No," I said. "Never. But they looked real signature letterhead, all of it." The judge leaned forward, pen tapping. "We'll need a full audit." Ethan smiled. "We welcome transparency, Your Honor." It was a slaughter disguised as civility. After the hearing, Caleb looked pale. "They're building something bigger than divorce. If the audit sticks, they'll refer it to the IRS. You could face charges. Charges for what I didn't do a damn thing wrong." "I believe you," he said, but his eyes had that lawyer's doubt, the kind that eats faith for breakfast. The next few weeks were a blur of subpoenas and humiliation. Sabrina filed for exclusive use of the marital home, claiming she feared for her safety. She got it. Ethan filed motions accusing me of tampering with evidence. He got that too. They even brought in a psychologist, a Dr. Karen Hoyt, who testified that Sabrina suffered from complex PTSD due to years of emotional coercion. When Caleb cross-examined her, she admitted she'd never met me, never spoken to me, never reviewed independent records. "My evaluation is based solely on client disclosure," she said confidently. In other words, on Sabrina's script. By the third hearing, I could feel the judge's sympathy leaning across the aisle. The gallery was full of Sabrina's friends whispering behind manicured hands. Every time Ethan spoke, heads nodded like churchgoers. We tried to introduce evidence from Lydia, the hotel photos, the call logs, but Ethan objected on privacy invasion. Judge Meeks sustained it. "Irrelevant to the financial dispute," she said. "Your Honor," Caleb protested, "this goes to credibility." "Counselor," she replied coldly, "I decide what's relevant." I wanted to stand up and shout. I wanted to tell the truth in plain English, not legal dialect. But in that courtroom, the truth wasn't evidence. It was noise. Outside, Lydia met me by the steps. "You're not fighting one woman and one lawyer," she said quietly. "You're fighting a network." Marla, the clerk who notarized half these motions, she's Ethan's inside line. He uses her to file ex parte petitions before you even know they exist. I found money going to her cousin's landscaping company. Looks like bribes. I stared at the courthouse windows reflecting the clouds. "You can prove it, not yet," she said, "but I will." That night I sat in the dark living room of the Decatur house, my house, and realized it no longer felt like mine. The walls that once held laughter now echoed with legal jargon, affidavit, injunction, deposition. Even the air seemed to belong to them. Then came the press. A blogger leaked excerpts from Sabrina's victim statement. It spread through Facebook groups like wildfire.
Old clients stopped returning calls. A city councilman withdrew a deal we'd been negotiating for months. Bad optics, he said. In 2 months, 30 years of reputation crumbled like wet drywall. The audit came back inconclusive but concerning. The IRS flagged my accounts for review. Sabrina filed a supplemental motion demanding full control of our properties to prevent asset concealment. At that hearing, Ethan introduced new evidence emails between me and a shell company in Florida, fabricated but convincing. Caleb objected again, but the judge allowed them into record for context. That's when I realized this wasn't about money, it was about annihilation. After the gavel struck, Sabrina walked out holding Ethan's arm. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. She'd already won the image war. I stood on the courthouse steps watching the two of them disappear into a black Mercedes I used to own. Lydia called my name holding her phone out. I found something she said, a pattern. She showed me a spreadsheet, 7 cases over the past 10 years. All handled by Ethan. All women represented by him against wealthy older husbands. All settled in the wife's favor under Judge Meeks. Same psychologist, same clerk, every single time. This is bigger than just your divorce, she whispered. You're not the first. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number popped up. Stop digging. The law always wins. Lydia smiled without humor. They think the law is theirs. I looked back at the courthouse where my name had just been turned into a warning. My lawyer's voice echoed in my head. You can't win when the game's rigged. Maybe not in their court, but there were other kinds of justice. That night, I poured a drink I couldn't afford and studied my grandfather's old photograph on the mantel, his eyes steady, his smile patient. He'd been betrayed once too by a partner who ran off with his savings. But he'd never broken. Neither would I. I just didn't know yet that my second act had already been written waiting for me inside a forgotten green passbook that would soon change everything. There's a kind of silence that follows defeat. It doesn't shout or sting, it just settles heavy as dust on old furniture. That's the silence that lived with me after the last hearing. The judge's gavel had taken everything: my homes, my accounts, my good name. I was left with a rented room off Moreland Avenue, a rusted Ford, and a body that creaked every time I stood up. You'd think at 68 I'd have earned rest. Instead, I earned invisibility. I took whatever work I could find. Fixing gutters, painting fences, lifting furniture for a moving crew half my age. The men called me old head and asked me to tell stories from back in the day. I smiled and made them laugh because it beat crying. My back screamed every night, but at least the pain was honest, unlike the lies that put me here. Sometimes I'd pass one of my old properties now with fresh paint and new owners who didn't know the ground they walked on had been stolen. I'd stand across the street pretending to check my phone, watching their porch lights come on, the sound of laughter inside. I never hated them. They were just living inside my ghosts. My kids were gone. Naomi blocked my number. Darren sent one text that read, "Mom told us everything. I need space." That was the last I heard. I learned quickly that losing money is nothing compared to losing your children's belief in you. Nights were the worst. I'd sit in that tiny room, the walls breathing mold, the sound of sirens outside, and wonder what a man is supposed to do when every pillar of his life crumbles. For a while I stopped shaving, stopped checking the mirror. There's nothing worse than seeing the eyes of a man who doesn't know himself anymore. Then one afternoon, something strange happened. I'd gone to Atlanta Mutual Credit and Trust, the small credit union my family had used since my father's time. I had an old savings account there, one my dad opened for me in the 1970s. I figured I'd close it, maybe pull out the $50 or $60 that might still be in there. Enough to cover groceries, maybe a bus pass. The place looked different now, shiny marble floors, glass walls, everyone wearing headsets like air traffic controllers. I felt out of place, like a ghost wandering through a world that had outgrown him. A young teller with a nose ring and an over-rehearsed smile took my passbook and squinted. "Wow, this is vintage," she said, laughing softly. "Let me check the system." She typed a few keys, frowned, then excused herself. "One moment, Mr. Mercer." I waited. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Finally, a man stepped out from the glass office, silver hair, round glasses, the kind of calm that comes from decades in the business. His nameplate read, Hollis Greer, branch manager. Mr. Mercer, he said gently, would you come with me, please? His office smelled of old cedar and lemon polish. He closed the door behind me and gestured for me to sit. His fingers tapped the desk, not nervously, thoughtfully. I looked into your account, he said, eyes narrowing behind the lenses. You mentioned it was from your father's time. Do you recall if it was ever tied to another name? I shrugged. Maybe my grandfather, Frederick Mercer. He opened most of the family's stuff after the war. Greer nodded, slowly turned his monitor toward me, and the world stopped moving.
There it was. Account number 04811 FM, active not dormant, tied to a trust. Balance line 93 476 212.19. For a full 5 seconds I couldn't breathe. My brain refused to translate that many zeros into reality. That can't be right, I whispered. It's correct, Hollis said, voice steady. The account began in 1951 as a dividend reinvestment portfolio with Georgia Power, later rolled into utility and transport trusts. Due to compound interest stock splits and long-term DRIP participation, it's grown steadily for 74 years. Your grandfather structured it with survivorship rights to your father and then to you. I stared at the number again like it might vanish if I blinked. Sir Hollis continued, we'll need to verify identity before any transfer, but legally, this money belongs to you. I sat there frozen, the same man who'd eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner last night, now being told he was worth $93 million.
Hollis opened a small drawer and pulled out a yellowed envelope, sealed in red wax, my name written across it in graceful ink, Jonathan E. Mercer. This was stored with the original trust documents, he said. Your grandfather left instructions that it be delivered only when the beneficiary accessed the account for the first time. My fingers trembled as I took it. The wax cracked softly like an old door opening to another life. Inside, a folded sheet of cream paper written in fountain pen. My dear Jonathan, if you're reading this, it means time has done what I hoped it would. I've been betrayed once in my life too. My business partner took my savings, my pride, and left me hollow. That's when I learned a man's true wealth isn't what he shows, it's what he hides from greedy eyes. I put $50 into this account in 1951. Not for me, but for you. For the day when the world breaks your back and you think God's forgotten your name. When that day comes, know this, bad men can take everything they see, but they can never take what they don't know exists. Use this not for revenge, but for rebuilding. Use it to remember who you are when the world calls you worthless. Honor our name, and never ever let bitterness make a home in your heart. With love and faith. Your grandfather, Frederick H. Mercer. By the time I finished reading, the ink had blurred under my tears. For a long while I couldn't speak. When I finally looked up, Hollis had the decency to look away, giving me the space to breathe. Your grandfather was a wise man, he said quietly. He must have known this would matter more now than it ever could have then. I folded the letter, pressing it against my chest like a heartbeat. He knew something. Maybe he knew men like me don't get mercy unless we make it ourselves. Hollis leaned forward. If I may, Mr. Mercer, I would advise complete discretion.
Not a soul should know about this until you secure legal and financial protection.
Believe me, I said. No one's listening to me these days anyway. He chuckled softly, then printed out a temporary statement and a list of next steps. You'll need a new account number, privacy agreements, and a fiduciary attorney. I can recommend someone if you'd like. Not yet, I said. Let's keep it between us for now. He nodded. Understood. When I stepped out into the Georgia sun, it hit me different. The same heat that had felt like punishment now felt alive, sharp, real. The air hummed with possibility. I walked past the glass windows, past the people checking balances that might not reach 3 digits, and thought how insane it was that mine had turned into 8. But the strangest thing was, I didn't feel rich. I felt clear. Money wasn't the miracle. The miracle was the letter. Those words, use it not for revenge, but for rebuilding. Still, I knew this rebuilding and revenge sometimes wear the same face depending on who's looking. I got on the bus back to Moreland Avenue, clutching the envelope like it might vanish if I blinked too hard. The passengers looked half asleep, weary from long shifts. No one noticed the old man in the wrinkled suit holding $93 million in his pocket. That night I sat on my narrow bed, spread out the bank statement, and whispered to the photo of my grandfather I kept on the nightstand. "You were right, old man. They took everything they could see, but you left me what they couldn't." Then I pulled out a notepad and started making lists, names, dates, documents, every step Sabrina and Ethan had taken to ruin me. I wasn't sure yet what kind of justice I'd deliver, but I knew one thing for certain: this story wasn't ending in a motel room. It was just beginning. For the first time in months, I woke up without dread sitting on my chest. It didn't feel like victory, more like the moment before a storm when the air holds its breath. $93 million hidden in plain sight. My grandfather's quiet genius. But that number wasn't salvation. It was a weapon, and I needed to learn how to hold it without letting it burn through my hands. I didn't buy a new car, didn't move out of the motel. I still wore the same gray suit, the one that smelled faintly of defeat. The less the world noticed me, the better. Let them think I was finished. Ghosts don't scare anyone until they start moving. The first step was finding a lawyer I could trust. The kind who wasn't for sale. I called every contact I had, left old colleagues, church friends, even a retired judge I used to play chess with on Sunday afternoons. Every road led to one name: Alicia Rowe. She was 44, sharp, deliberate, with a stare that could slice marble. Harvard Law ex-prosecutor, known in Atlanta's legal circles as the woman who files when others flinch. I met her at a cafe on Edgewood Avenue. She arrived 5 minutes early, black suit, natural curls tied back, no makeup except purpose. "Mr. Mercer," she said, shaking my hand firmly. "I read your file. It stinks." That's a polite word for it. Forged documents, biased judge, recurring expert witnesses, textbook judicial manipulation. "But you didn't hire me to complain. What do you want?" "Not revenge," I said slowly. "Justice. I want the truth on record, and I want every person who touched this to answer for it." Her smile was faint but genuine. "That's good. Revenge is for amateurs." I slid the letter from my grandfather across the table, the wax seal still faintly visible. "There's something you should know. I can fund this." Quietly. Her brows lifted slightly. "You came into money. You could say it found me. Doesn't change what I am, but it changes what I can do." She nodded, professional enough not to ask how much. "Then here's the plan. We don't go after your ex-wife first. We start with the structure, the clerk, the psychologist, the financial fraud. If we build a pattern, we can file under Rule 60B, fraud on the court. If the judge was compromised, everything collapses. And Ethan. We'll get to him. But we don't chase wolves until we've mapped the forest." Over the next week, Alicia assembled a small team. Lydia Tran stayed on as private investigator. She'd earned that seat. We added Dr. Paul Seaver, a forensic document examiner from North Carolina, Omar and Kayla, two 20-something cybersecurity wizards, and Renee Whitaker, a CPA who'd left one of the big four firms after blowing the whistle on internal misconduct. I rented a small office downtown, nothing flashy, just four walls and working locks. I paid cash through a shell LLC under a name no one would trace. We worked mostly at night. Alicia called it the basement. Each night, Lydia brought files like bread from the battlefield court clerk, payment logs, subpoena histories, old docket changes. Omar hacked through encrypted drives from Ethan's firm using digital breadcrumbs hidden in metadata. Within days, patterns emerged. Marla Keene, the court clerk who handled my filings, had a side LLC, Keene Landscaping Services. The company had no trucks, no tools, no employees, but it received steady payments from law firms connected to Ethan. Renee followed the money trail, eyes gleaming. "See this," she said, pointing to the screen. They disguised kickbacks as service invoices, yard maintenance, document shredding, even office cleaning. Except none of these services ever happened. Next came the expert psychologist Dr. Hoyt, whose PTSD reports had sunk me. Kayla ran plagiarism software through every one of her testimonies in past cases. The result, 87% identical phrasing. Copy-paste empathy. "This isn't therapy," Alicia muttered. "It's theater." 2 weeks later, Lydia called one night breathless. I got one of Ethan's clients to talk woman named Carla Benson. He coached her through the same playbook: fake abuse claims, asset freezes, sympathetic expert, and Judge Meeks every single time. That name made Alicia pause mid-sentence. 7 cases, same judge, she said. If Meeks knew or ignored the pattern, that's not bias, it's complicity. We started assembling a case file that looked less like a divorce and more like a criminal enterprise. Wire fraud, bribery, forgery, patterned judicial corruption, RICO-level structure. But we stayed quiet. That was the key. While the team hunted evidence, I played my part, still the ruined old man, still invisible. I took the bus, ate cheap, pretended to fold under life's weight. Ethan and Sabrina moved freely, certain I'd vanished into bitterness. They'd show up at charity galas photographed in glossy magazines under captions like "Defenders of Women's Rights."
The irony burned, but I waited. One afternoon, I saw them both in person midtown outside the cafe where Sabrina and I used to have brunch every Sunday. She was laughing, her hand resting on Ethan's arm. He kissed her temple and she didn't flinch. I wanted to hate her. God knows I tried. But beneath the anger was something softer, older grief for the woman who used to sing in the kitchen barefoot and happy. That night, I took Naomi's and Darren's photos out of my wallet, cleaned the cracked glass, and made a decision. If they wouldn't believe their father, maybe they'd believe the truth once the whole city saw it. Alicia drafted a plan as precise as a military campaign. "We're going to let them indict themselves," she said. She filed a bar complaint against Ethan anonymously, citing evidence from Lydia and Renee. Then she leaked a fragment one forged spreadsheet to a journalist she trusted, just enough to make the state's public integrity unit curious. Meanwhile, we filed a Freedom of Information request for Judge Meeks's campaign contributions. Renee found donations from shell companies connected to Ethan's clients, all routed through the same landscaping LLC. We were building a fire that could burn quietly for months until it roared. During this time, I found small ways to help my children without revealing myself. Naomi's hospital was under investigation after a supervisor accused her of negligence in a medication error. Lydia traced the anonymous complaint back to Ethan's paralegal. I made a call, pulled a few strings, and the accusation vanished. Darren was drowning in debt: gym, lease equipment, loans, taxes. A private investor appeared one morning and cleared his balance sheet. He never knew the man behind it. I didn't want thanks. I just wanted them safe. Late one night in the office, Omar lifted his head from his laptop, eyes wide. "Boss," he said, "you need to see this." On the screen was a decrypted folder from Ethan's cloud archive. Its name, DVKit Mercer Final.pdf. It was a manual, my own destruction laid out step by step. Template affidavits, psychologist scripts, motion drafts, fake email threads. Every line tailored to my life. But that wasn't the worst part. The folder contained similar files named after other men, wealthy, older, recently divorced. 7 of them. Alicia stood behind me, jaw tight. He's been running this scheme for years, coaching women, forging evidence, bribing clerks, securing favorable judges. It's organized crime. I stared at the glowing screen. And my wife. "She's one of many," Alicia said, "but she's the one who'll bring them all down." Outside, the city hummed its indifferent song, sirens, trains, laughter from distant bars. Inside, something cold and ancient settled in my bones. My grandfather's words echoed from the letter, "They can't steal what they can't see." Maybe not, but now I could see them. Every lie, every dollar, every hand that signed my ruin. And soon they'd see me too. Not the broken old man they left behind, not the ghost they thought they'd buried, but the truth they never saw coming. Justice, I learned, isn't a thunderclap. It's a drip of water carving through stone, slow, steady, inevitable. And I was ready to let it carve. It had been 6 months since I discovered the account. 6 months of silence while the world thought I'd vanished. Sabrina and Ethan had settled into their stolen kingdom, my house in Brookhaven, my cars, my life parading their victory like a prize at the county fair. But behind the curtains, the gears of truth were turning. Alicia called it controlled exposure. "Never swing too early," she said. "Let them hang themselves with their own rope." So we waited, we documented, we collected. Lydia's latest report confirmed what we'd suspected. Ethan's network reached deeper than expected. Judges, clerks, psychologists, and even a real estate broker who helped sell off seized assets from the husbands he'd destroyed. They all took their cut. It was a machine of ruin perfectly greased by ego and greed. Meanwhile, the bar complaint Alicia filed anonymously had started echoing through the corridors of the Georgia State Bar like a rumor too heavy to stay quiet. The Public Integrity Unit opened a preliminary review into Ethan's case history. On paper, nothing connected to me yet, but Ethan was sweating. One Tuesday evening, Lydia intercepted a private call from him to Sabrina. She played it back for me in the office, Ethan's voice tight, no longer the smooth charm I remembered. "They're sniffing around my old cases. Someone's stirring ghosts. If anyone asks, you knew nothing." "What about John?" Sabrina asked softly. "Forget him. He's broke and bitter. Dead men don't sue." He wasn't wrong. I was broke and bitter once, but now I was something worse for him. Patient. We spent the next month weaving a timeline of fraud, cross-referencing every case Ethan handled, every motion Meeks approved, every wire payment Marla Keene processed. By March, we had what Alicia called a nuclear file. 400 pages of digital evidence bank transfers, manipulated testimonies, falsified financials, and witness payoffs. Enough to light up the whole courthouse. But Alicia wasn't satisfied. "Evidence is one thing," she said, tapping her pen against the table. "Narrative wins trials. We need a story the DA can sell to the public, something they can't bury quietly." That's when I made a choice. I decided to become the story. I called Gloria Mitchell, a journalist from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, one of the few still doing real investigative work. I'd known her late husband back when I was on the Chamber of Commerce board. Gloria was sharp, uncompromising, and allergic to corruption. We met in a quiet park off Ponce de Leon. She wore jeans, sunglasses, and suspicion. "You asked for this meeting, John. Why me? Because you don't print gossip. You print truth." She tilted her head. "Truth's expensive these days. You sure you can afford it?" I smiled faintly. "Let's just say I'm liquid again." Over coffee, I told her everything. The affair, the forged evidence, the bought judge, the fake PTSD reports, the fraudulent audit, the hidden network. She didn't interrupt once, just scribbled in her notebook, her brow furrowing deeper with each revelation. When I finished, she leaned back, studying me. "If even half of this is true, it'll shake the city. It's all true, and I can prove it." She paused. "Then why give it to me?" "You could go straight to the DA. Because the DA will move when the public screams loud enough," I said. "You give them the reason to scream." Gloria's grin was slow and dangerous. Now that's a quote. 2 weeks later, her article dropped online, "Inside Atlanta's Divorce Machine. How Corruption, Greed, and a Network of Power Destroyed Dozens of Lives." The piece hit like a detonation. She never named me directly, just one retired businessman who lost everything. But the details were unmistakable. By noon, it was trending statewide. By evening, Meeks, Keene, and Hoyt were all temporarily reassigned. By midnight, Ethan's firm locked its doors. Alicia called, her voice calm but triumphant. "The DA's office just requested our files. They're opening a full criminal investigation." I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt stillness, the same kind my grandfather must have felt when the crops finally broke through the soil after a long drought. But the game wasn't over. 3 nights later, Lydia sent me photos from a private investigator tailing Ethan. He and Sabrina were packing boxes from my Brookhaven house. Jewelry, art documents. They were preparing to run.
"They smell the fire," Lydia said.
"You want me to stop them?" "No," I said quietly. "Let them run. The law will chase them faster than we ever could."
Alicia filed our motion to annul the divorce under fraud on the court the next morning. It was a legal earthquake. The filing included every piece of evidence, every transfer, every voice recording. The case became public record, and once it did, journalists, bloggers, and even TV anchors tore through it like wolves. The phone started ringing non-stop. Reporters, lawyers, former victims, men who'd been ruined like me. One of them, a retired dentist named Robert Wells, broke down crying on the line. "I thought I was alone," he said. "They made me believe I was the crazy one." "You're not," I told him. "You were just first." The DA's office finally reached out through Alicia. They wanted to meet. When we arrived, the lead prosecutor, a woman named Carmen Davis, stood by the window reading Gloria's article. She turned expression neutral. "Mr. Mercer, I've seen a lot of dirty cases. But this..." She lifted the folder Alicia handed her. "This is rot from the inside." Alicia folded her arms. "Then dig it out." Carmen nodded. "We're going to, but we need you to stay quiet until the warrants are ready. Can you do that?" I smiled. "Quiet is my specialty." The next weeks blurred into long nights and phone calls. The DA cross-referenced our files with subpoenaed bank statements. It didn't take long. Within a month, she had probable cause for racketeering, forgery, bribery, and conspiracy to defraud. Ethan's network was about to collapse under its own weight. But fate has a sense of drama. The arrests were scheduled for the same night. Ethan and Sabrina planned a charity gala in my former home, a glittering evening for domestic abuse awareness. The irony nearly made me laugh. The guest list read like a who's who of Atlanta's elite judges, lawyers, donors, all sipping champagne inside the very walls they'd helped steal from me. When Alicia told me, she smiled grimly. The DA's planning to execute the warrants right there during the event. "Poetic," I said softly. My grandfather would have called it divine symmetry. That night, I sat alone on my motel bed, the glow of the city pulsing outside. $93 million in silent accounts. 40 years of life reduced to a headline, and a storm brewing that would finally wash the stain clean. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt readiness, the kind that comes after being buried alive and realizing you can still breathe. As I closed my eyes, I whispered the same words my grandfather wrote 70 years ago. "Bad men can take everything they see, but they can never take what they don't know exists." And tomorrow, they were about to see everything. Justice doesn't knock politely, it kicks the door down when it's ready. And that night, it kicked hard. The air over Brookhaven carried the kind of stillness that comes before something sacred or catastrophic. Inside the house that used to be mine, chandeliers burned too bright, laughter was too loud, and the smell of stolen wealth mixed with champagne. Sabrina was radiant as always, red dress, flawless curls, a diamond necklace that once hung around her neck the night I gave her our 25th anniversary toast. Ethan, smug and polished, floated beside her like a serpent in silk. Their guests, judges, investors, city officials clinked glasses and whispered gossip under the banner of Domestic Justice Foundation annual benefit. The irony made God smile, I think. At exactly 9:17 p.m., 3 black SUVs rolled silently to a stop in front of the house. Out stepped 6 agents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, followed by District Attorney Carmen Davis. No sirens, no warning. Just quiet efficiency. Inside, the band was halfway through a Sinatra number when the first badge flashed. "Ethan Rowe, you are under arrest for fraud, forgery, racketeering, and obstruction of justice." The music choked to silence. A champagne glass fell shattering against marble. Ethan froze just a beat, then tried to recover his smile, twitching. "This is ridiculous," he stammered. "There must be some mistake. Do you even know who Yes Sir and Agent cut in?" "We do." Handcuffs clicked like punctuation. Then Carmen turned to Sabrina. "Mrs. Rowe, you are being charged as an accessory to fraud and conspiracy to pervert justice." Sabrina's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her eyes darted to Ethan, confusion, fear, then something colder. She took one step back from him. He tried to speak, but she beat him to it. "He told me to do it," she whispered. "I didn't know." But she had known. Every lie, every forged signature, every whispered plan. Phones lifted around them. Guests filmed as law officers led them away through the grand entrance, past the portraits. She hadn't bothered to take down my family's photos, still hanging on those walls like ghosts watching their thieves hauled to judgment. By morning, every outlet in Atlanta was playing the footage. Prominent attorney and socialite arrested in massive divorce fraud ring. Their empire burned on live television. I didn't watch the news. I didn't have to. I could feel it in the air, the collective gasp of a city realizing who its villains were. Instead, I sat in Alicia's office. She slid a court notice across the table, motion to annul divorce hearing scheduled. "It's official," she said. The court acknowledged procedural fraud. "Once this hearing's done, every asset reverts to you." I studied the paper in silence. "It's strange," I said. "You spend a lifetime building something, and when it's gone, you think getting it back will make you whole. But it doesn't. It just evens the score." Alicia nodded. "Maybe that's enough, but it wasn't. I wanted peace, not symmetry." The day of the hearing came like deja vu, same courthouse, same marble steps, but this time I didn't walk in as the accused. I walked in as the proof. Ethan wasn't there, he was in county jail, denied bail. Sabrina sat beside her defense lawyer, eyes hollow, makeup gone, wrists trembling. For a moment I didn't see the woman who betrayed me. I saw the woman who used to hum Billie Holiday while cooking breakfast. The woman I'd once prayed for. When the judge, a different one this time, entered the room, fell still. She reviewed the files, the evidence, the signed confessions from the bribed clerk and psychologist. It didn't take long. "This court finds clear evidence of systemic fraud and collusion," she declared. "The Mercer v. Mercer divorce decree is hereby annulled. All properties, assets, and financial holdings are to be restored to Mr. Jonathan Mercer. Furthermore, the defendants are to face separate criminal proceedings." The gavel came down, one sharp, clean strike. It sounded like an ending, but it was really the first honest beginning I'd had in decades. Reporters swarmed outside, but I said nothing. Justice doesn't need speeches. It speaks for itself. That evening, I returned to the Brookhaven house. My house. The locks had already been changed. The marble floors gleamed like they were waiting for me. I walked room to room in silence. Everything looked smaller. The furniture, the art, the memories. Or maybe I had just grown beyond them. In the study, the same room where Sabrina and Ethan had planned my destruction, I found a framed photo still on the shelf. Our family Christmas 2005, Naomi's braces, Darren's awkward teenage grin, Sabrina's arm around me. I should have thrown it away, but I didn't. I set it back upright and whispered, "Est now, it's over." But the truth was, it wasn't over. Not really.
Later that week, Naomi called. I hadn't heard her voice in 2 years. It cracked through the line like sunlight through blinds. "Dad," she said, voice trembling. "I saw the news. I didn't know. God, I didn't know." "I know, baby," I said softly. "I was wrong. We both were. We thought you—" She broke off crying. "I'm sorry, Dad. I know. I don't deserve forgiveness. None of us do. That's why it's powerful." Silence. Then a whisper, "Can I see you?" When she arrived the next morning, I almost didn't recognize her, thinner, tired, but still my daughter. She hugged me like she was afraid I might vanish if she let go. Later that day, Darren came too. He stood on the porch, hands in pockets, eyes down. "You helped me," he said. "The business bailout, that was you, wasn't it?" I didn't answer. He smiled sadly. "Thank you." And just like that, something fragile began to mend. Over the next weeks, I returned what I could to normal life. Not the old kind of normal that's gone forever, but a quieter one. I met with the DA, testified against Ethan, watched his smirk fade as his own words buried him. He was sentenced to 20 years without parole. Sabrina got 8. At the sentencing, she turned once, looking for me. I nodded. No hatred, just finality. She nodded back, tears streaking down her face, a silent surrender. Outside the courthouse, the sky opened in a soft rain. I stood under it, face lifted, letting it wash away the last pieces of bitterness. The world was quieter now. My name was cleared. My home was mine. My children were back in my life. But something had changed in me forever.
That night, I sat on my terrace overlooking the city lights and reread my grandfather's letter, the same old parchment that had started it all. Use your pain as fuel, not as poison. I smiled. You did it again, old man, I whispered. You saved me twice. And in that silence I realized, this wasn't revenge.
It was redemption. I used to think justice was the end of a story. Turns out it's just the middle, the quiet place between pain and purpose. Months after the trial, my life found a rhythm again, though it was nothing like before. The newspapers eventually moved on to new scandals, and the world forgot the names Ethan Rowe and Sabrina Mercer. But I remembered not to hate them, but to remember what happens when greed takes root in the soul. The city called me a survivor. I didn't feel like one. I felt like a man who'd walked through a house fire and come out with only his heartbeat left intact. That was enough. It took me a while to decide what to do with the money. $93 million sitting in silent accounts, old money that had survived wars, recessions, and my own despair. I could have bought the world back, new cars, new houses, new trophies. But that wasn't who I was anymore. One night, I found myself rereading my grandfather's letter again, fingers tracing his words as if they were carved into my skin. Use this money not for revenge, but to rebuild. Use your pain as fuel, not poison. That's when the idea came, not like lightning, but like a sunrise, slow, inevitable. I called Alicia the next morning. I want to build something, I said. She raised an eyebrow. Another business? No, I said. A legacy. And so the Frederick Mercer Foundation was born, named after the man who'd planted the seed of hope 70 years before I ever needed it. Its mission was simple: provide legal aid to victims of corrupt divorces and fraudulent cases, especially for seniors who had no one left to fight for them. Alicia became the foundation's legal director. Lydia ran investigations. Renee handled finance. The same people who'd helped me rebuild now helped others do the same. Within 6 months, we'd opened offices in 5 cities and taken on over 100 cases. The first woman we helped was Gloria Banks, 61, who'd lost her home to an ex-husband and his lawyer who forged her signature on a loan. She came to our office trembling, clutching faded documents in a grocery bag. When we won her case 3 months later, she brought me a small plant in a cracked pot. It's all I can give, she said through tears. But it's alive, just like I am again. That night, I placed that plant beside my grandfather's photograph. It's still there. The foundation grew faster than I imagined. Reporters started calling again, not for scandal, but for inspiration. People wanted to hear the story of the old man who turned betrayal into justice. I agreed to one interview, national television. The anchor asked if I felt satisfaction seeing my ex-wife in prison. I thought for a long time before answering. No, I said quietly. Satisfaction fades, peace stays. And peace doesn't come from watching someone else fall. It comes from standing again without hate in your heart. The clip went viral. Overnight letters flooded the foundation, hundreds of stories from people who had been manipulated, silenced, broken. Some were men like me, others were women seniors or single parents. I read every one. Some I answered myself late at night by hand. Forgiveness doesn't erase scars, but it teaches you to wear them with dignity. Naomi and Darren began volunteering at the foundation, Naomi as a medical advisor for victims suffering from stress disorders, Darren running wellness workshops for men recovering from financial trauma. We didn't talk much about the past anymore. We didn't need to. It lived between us quietly like an old scar that stopped hurting but never disappeared. One afternoon, after a year of running the foundation, Naomi handed me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dad, this is from Mom. It came from the prison last week. I didn't read it. I thought you should decide. I hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was familiar, careful, almost apologetic. John, I know I can't undo what I did. I ruined you, and in doing so, I ruined myself. I watched your interview last month. You said peace doesn't come from hate. That line broke me, because I've hated myself for every moment since the day they took me away.
I don't ask for forgiveness, only for the hope that in some corner of your heart you can believe I once loved you honestly. Tell our children I'm proud of them. Tell them I'm sorry. Tell them I'm learning to pray again. Sabrina. I folded it, laid it beside my grandfather's letter, and whispered, "You finally learned." That night, I drove to the ocean, the same place I used to take Sabrina when we were young. The tide was low, the wind steady. I stood there for a long time, shoes sinking into the wet sand, and realized something profound. The opposite of revenge isn't forgiveness, it's freedom. I no longer carried her in anger, only memory. Months later, the governor of Georgia invited me to the Capitol. They wanted to honor the foundation for its work in exposing legal corruption and pushing reform. Standing there under those high marble ceilings, I thought of my grandfather again, a man who died believing $50 and faith could outlast evil. And he'd been right. In my speech, I said justice isn't a hammer, it's a light, and light doesn't shout. It just shows what's been hiding in the dark. The audience stood. Cameras flashed, but I wasn't thinking about the applause. I was thinking about that night in the motel when I almost gave up, when I thought God had turned his face away from me. He hadn't. He'd just been quiet, letting me learn how to listen. These days, my mornings are simple. I wake up early, make coffee, feed the stray cat that's adopted me. I walk the shoreline behind the house, the same one I once thought I'd never see again. Sometimes Naomi calls, sometimes Darren visits, sometimes I sit alone with silence, but it's not the heavy kind anymore. It's the peaceful kind. The plant Gloria gave me is taller now, green and stubborn, reaching for the light. I've outlived my enemies, outlasted my mistakes, and learned that dignity isn't something you keep, it's something you rebuild piece by piece when the world tries to take it from you. Before I sleep, I still read my grandfather's line one more time. Bad men can take everything they see, but they can never take what they don't know exists. He was talking about hidden money, but now I know he meant something far greater, the unbreakable part of the soul. So I close my eyes and I thank him for the fortune, for the lesson, for the seed he planted long before I was born. Because that seed grew into more than survival. It grew into light. You know, people think revenge is about getting even. It's not. It's about remembering who you are after the world tried to make you forget. I lost everything, my home, my pride, my family, and somehow that was what saved me. Because when you've got nothing left to prove, you finally start living for what matters: peace, not payback. If you're still watching this, tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you forgive? Or would you fight? My name is Jonathan Mercer, and this was my story, not about revenge, but about redemption. Until next time, take care of your dignity. It's worth more than anything they can steal.